So here's the optimal walking prescription I try to follow every day. Number 1, walk more than 10,000 steps a day. Number 2, walk fast. Number 3, walk in silence. Number 4, walk among nature when possible. This is to harness the green exercise effect. And number 5, use minimalist or barefoot shoes. Okay, so let's dive into these in more detail. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Adam. I'm a medical doctor based in London, and in this video I'm going to detail my evidence-based optimal walking routine for health and longevity. So number 1, what is the optimal amount of walking we should do every day? So the ideal step count is around 10 to 12,000 steps a day. And this is from one of the largest studies done on walking, which was published in 2020 in JAMA. They looked at 4,840 people aged 40 or older, and they were followed for 7 days. All the participants were wearing health trackers that measured step count and measured walking intensity, and then they followed up with them over 10 years. The first finding from the study was a dose-dependent effect of step count on mortality rates or death rates. So the higher the step count, the lower the death rate was within this group. And this was true even after adjusting for confounding variables like age, comorbidities, and smoking status, etc. So the main causes of death in the people who did eventually die were cardiovascular disease and cancer. So this kind of suggests a protective effect of walking from these diseases. But bear in mind that when we look at the population as a whole, cardiovascular disease and cancer are among the most common causes of death, so we would kind of expect that. Now, another interesting finding from this study is that the relationship between death and step count seemed to diminish at around 10 to 12,000 steps a day. So if you look at the curve between death rate and step count, it's steep at first, and then it levels out at around 10 to 12,000 steps a day. So this suggests that there's a point of diminishing returns around 10 to 12,000 steps. Before that, the more you walk, the better. But after 10,000 steps, you're not really gaining any additional benefit. Another paper just published in the journal Nature in October of this year showed that the risk of 6 major diseases goes down significantly the more we walk. And these diseases were hypertension, diabetes, reflux, depression, obesity, and sleep apnea. Now, in this study, the optimal target was about 8,000 steps a day. So go to your health app right now, even if you don't wear a biowearable, look at the average daily step count over the last month. And if the number is less than 8,000 steps a day, you might be at increased risk of these diseases. So takeaway here is incorporate 10,000 steps at least into your daily life. The way I personally do this is I make sure that the gym or where I work is around 3,000 steps away. And that way, when I go to these places, I'm incorporating steps into my daily routine. Okay, so number 2, speed of walking. Interestingly, in this study, they didn't really see a similar relationship between speed of walking and death rate. However, people who did walk more tended to walk faster, and they had a lower mortality rate as a result. And we also know from other studies that increasing the intensity of walking is healthier in general because it increases our energy expenditure and overall fitness. So that's why in my optimal walking prescription, I include being a fast walker. Okay, number 3, walk in silence. So the idea here is to limit distractions that will hinder our creative ideation. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, was known for his walking meetings, and it seems like he was onto something. A study by researchers at Stanford found that walking boosts creative inspiration, and it increases the ability to come up with new ideas and solutions to problems. So in this study, for example, and similar studies have been done, they measured creative ideation while walking on a treadmill versus while sitting. And the difference in this study was a 60% increase in creative ability while walking. And by the way they measure creative ability here is by using a test called Guilford's Alternative Uses Test. It's done by asking the subject to think of as many uses as possible for a common object, like a brick or a shoe or a paperclip. And the more use cases you get, the higher your creative ability is. So because creativity is boosted when walking, I think we should try to avoid suppressing our creative thinking by filling up our time walking with podcasts or music, and kind of let our mind wander to get the most out of it. That's especially true if I'm facing a problem that needs creative thinking. I go for a walk and try to think about it while I'm walking. By the way, another interesting study on this subject, and I'll link to all the studies in the description. This study showed that creative thinking was even higher when walking outside in nature than when walking on a treadmill inside. And this brings me to point number 4, which is walk amongst nature when possible. So you probably know that walking has a great positive effect on mental health in general. A big systematic review of 26 studies published last year looked at the effect of walking on different markers of mental health, and it showed a strong positive association between long distance walking and all mental health markers they looked at. And these included markers like well-being questionnaire tests, biological markers of emotional distress, and quality of life scores. An interesting point here is that these positive effects of long-distance walking seem to be caused by reduction of existing level of stress rather than addition of pleasure. Something I found even more interesting was this concept of the green exercise effect. So many of these studies showed a synergistic effect of any kind of exercise and being in nature. So that means that the sum of the two is greater than one or the other on its own. So as one article put it, it seems that the presence of living things makes us feel good. And I think that's really true, and I try to incorporate that in my daily walking routines. The more engaged we are in nature, the more benefits we seem to get. So there are 3 levels of engagement, according to one paper, with nature. So level 1 is simply viewing nature through a window, for example. Level 2 is being physically present in or nearby a natural environment, so walking in a park, for example. And level 3 is active participation in nature, so things like gardening and farming. And the higher we go in these levels and engagement in nature, the better the effects on our mental health. So it seems that green exercise has more benefits than just exercising alone. Although I did find one study that did not find a difference between mountain hiking outside compared to treadmill walking. Number 5, and this is kind of optional, I don't do it all the time, but I recommend using minimalist or barefoot shoes. And these are shoes that allow your feet and the muscles of your feet to move freely instead of being in a tight compartment like most shoes. And these shoes have a thin, flat sole, and the idea is to mimic being barefoot. Now, to be honest, some of these shoes look a bit weird, but there are brands out there that are making them look like normal shoes, and some of them actually look quite cool. So I could make a separate video about this topic, but there's an interesting study that compares using minimalist shoes to people who undergo a dedicated foot strengthening program. And the study showed that just using minimalist shoes can strengthen your foot muscles to a similar degree to a dedicated foot strengthening exercise program. Now, that was my 5-point optimal walking prescription, but I do want to say here that walking alone is not enough. So if we really want to optimize our health, we want to be active throughout the day by walking a lot and not staying sedentary for long periods of time. But in addition to that, we do need periods of high intensity activities throughout the day, or once a day at least. So I'll talk more about that and other topics in future videos. Please consider subscribing, and I've linked to all the relevant literature that I mentioned today in the description box. Thank you for watching. See you next video.